Hi, I'm EJ. Welcome back to NonCompete. In our last video, we discussed many of the ways in which the liberal media is misguiding the working class during these oh-so-trying times, and the response has been mostly fire, with many of you saying we cooked and glazing the video as a bop. But we also got put on blast over our discussions of the terms techno-feudalism and oligarchy, with a few salty viewers throwing shade that our opinions were mid, cap, or even out of pocket. Now I'll go ahead and take the L in admitting that we could have explained those concepts better, so we'd like to take the time now to clarify and develop those more controversial and misunderstood concepts in this and future videos. We plan a full deep dive into the whole techno-feudalism thing in the near future, but that one is turning out to be quite a bit of a project, so give us a few weeks on that. In this video, we want to expand on the concept of oligarchy as it pertains to capitalist society. Hopefully we can yeet any false consciousness about the tyranny of the ruling class and clap back against some of the misunderstandings we've spotted in the comments section. As with all of our videos, I will be using dialectical materialism as the philosophical foundation of my analysis. Dialectical materialism could also be referred to as Marxist thought, or just Marxism, because this philosophy was first developed by Karl Marx and your boy Friedrich Engels. You don't need to be familiar with Diamat to watch this video. I will do my best to explain things as we go along, but if the ideas in this video appeal to you, we'd love for you to take a much deeper dive into Diamat by reading our curriculum. You can get the print copy if you like, but the free ebook is also available at banyanhouse.org/shop. So in our last video, we made the claim that oligarchs under capitalism are capitalists, that these terms are in essence interchangeable. This is important for reasons that will hopefully become clear by the end of the video, but a lot of comments disagreed with our assessment that capitalists are by definition the oligarchs of capitalist society. Let's take a look at that clip and see what I said. And another buzzword that's getting thrown around, it's pretty similar to techno-feudalism, it's oligarchy. Yes, oligarchy. This word's especially been getting popular since Trump has started cozying up to Putin. It's implying that we are moving away from capitalism to the thing that is worse than capitalism. The implication is that somehow Russian-style oligarchy is essentially different from capitalism. But the fact is, all those oligarchs in Russia, those are capitalists. And guess what? The capitalists in the USA, they have always been oligarchs.
They're the same picture.
The USA has been an oligarchy since its foundation, and that's because the USA is capitalist, a bourgeois democracy. The founding fathers, those dudes with the wigs, were the very definition of oligarchs. The oligarchs of the modern era are capitalists. Capitalists are oligarchs. They're the same friggin' thing, and they always have been. So trying to claim that the USA is slipping into oligarchy all of a sudden is just an obfuscation of the fact that our capitalist system has always been oligarchical since its founding. So the commenters generally argued that capitalist is an economic role, whereas oligarch is a political role. Now, in fairness, there is some truth to that, but there's a little more to the story. In this video, we're going to explain how political power derives from economic power, which means that people who control the economy are inevitably the political oligarchs who rule over class society. Oligarchy is just Greek for rule by the few. In other words, an arrangement in which a small minority of powerful elites rule over the rest of society. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a really simple concept, but how and why oligarchy manifests in society can be quite complex. Why do oligarchies arise? Are they inevitable? Are they avoidable? What is the ultimate source of power for oligarchs? The pursuit of answers to questions like these is one of the chief concerns of the scientific theory known as historical materialism. Historical materialism is simply the application of dialectical materialism to the study of human society. We're currently working on a translation of the Vietnamese curriculum of historical materialism. It's actually part 2 of this book. And when it becomes available, you'll be able to get that one for free as well over at banyanhouse.org. So stay tuned for that. It's exciting stuff if you're a big Marxism nerd. For now, the most important thing to understand about historical materialism is that it aims to allow us to understand human society on an objective basis. In historical materialism, we try to understand the material basis for the changes and developments that take place in human society. According to dialectical materialism, there's a dialectical relationship between matter and consciousness. And in this relationship, matter determines consciousness, while consciousness can impact back on the material world. In other words, matter plays a primary role in how the world changes and develops, but importantly, human beings can also change the world through conscious activity. This makes sense for a huge number of reasons. First and foremost, you can't even think if you don't have a physical brain. And second, you can't do something if it isn't physically possible. No matter how much you want to do something, it has to be physically possible for you to be able to do that. The material conditions must exist for you to perform conscious activity in order for that action to be possible at all. There's a lot more to it than that, but hopefully now you have the general idea of what we mean when we say that matter determines consciousness and consciousness impacts back on the material world. Applying this principle to the study of human society, we arrive at a fundamental law that governs the progression of human history. Material conditions determine the existence of human society. But human social activity can also change and alter society in important ways. In historical materialism, we broadly break human society down into two components: the material base, which includes all of the material forces and relationships that determine human society, and the superstructure, which includes all the institutions and forces of human conscious activity. The most important and defining aspect of the material base is the economy. The economy includes all the relationships and activities which human beings develop so that we can sustain our own lives. In order to survive, we need things like food, shelter, clothing, that kind of stuff. And in order to produce those material needs of life, we establish relationships with each other, and we also establish relationships with nature. And this is very key to understanding all Marxism. We define everything through relationships, okay? We don't define by characteristics. We don't define things by putting them into categories. We define things by the relationships that they have with each other. So we have relationships with each other, we have relationships with nature to produce the things that we need to survive. That's the economy. The economy is so important to the material base of human society that it's also sometimes referred to as the economic base of human society. In any given era of society, humanity has a specific configuration of the means of production. The means of production include things like tools, factories, and roads, and ships, and land, and computer servers, nature, all the other things that we need to keep human life going in our world, and the things that we do, the labor that we perform. And yes, the means of production also does include nature. That's very important. Things like plants and animals and so on. And these relationships, which humans have with the means of production, with each other, define the economy in any given period of history. The superstructure of society includes all those institutions and relationships of social consciousness in human society. Things like culture, law, philosophy, art, media, and on and on. The most important and defining component of the superstructure of society these days is what we call politics. In historical materialism, we define politics as the social relationships that human beings have with each other to organize, develop, and benefit from the means of production. If you aren't familiar with historical materialism, this might sound like a really strange definition of politics. It sounded strange to me in the beginning, but remember that historical materialism considers the material base of society to be of chief concern in understanding human society. And the means of production are the most important aspect of the material base. In short, politics are the relationships that determine who controls the means of production and who therefore has power over society. In every human society, there is a base and there is a corresponding superstructure, meaning that by extension, every economic system has a political system. The political system must be suitable to the economic base in order for human society to properly function. Whenever the base of society changes, the superstructure will also change. That's very important also to understand. In a dialectical relationship, if one thing changes, the other thing also changes, and they are defined by that change, that mutual development. And if the economic base of society changes so much that the superstructure is no longer suitable with it, then a new superstructure will need to be developed for humanity to continue on. And this occurs through social revolution. For example, the reason that the era of feudalism ended is because the economic base developed so much through industrialization and other new developments in economic output that the feudal political superstructure was no longer suitable to the economic base. And this is what enabled the newly emerging capitalist class to rise up and overthrow the feudal lords of society through revolution, placing themselves at the top as the ruling class of a newly developed capitalist society. Land and lordship were no longer the basis of oligarchy. Capital became the basis of both economic and political power. Now, hopefully, you can see why we made that claim that oligarchs under capitalism are invariably members of the capitalist class. Political power is derived in our current society directly from ownership and control of the means of production. And this means that under capitalism, the economic ruling class, the people who own the means of production, the capitalists, are by definition society's political oligarchs. According to historical materialism, the idea of political power and economic power being metaphysically distinct and separate is nonsensical. And that's because we do not see politics and the economy as separate from each other. Instead, we recognize that the political superstructure of society and the economic base define and develop each other through a dialectical relationship. You cannot have an economy without politics, and you can't have politics without an economy. They define each other, they develop each other. And as I mentioned before, changes to the economic base define the political structure of society, just as political change in society leads to significant impact back upon that economic base. Politics and economy don't just go hand in hand with each other, they define each other. So when analyzing human society, we must consider both political and economic power together at the same time. And for this reason, in historical materialism, we define a period of human civilization by its political economy. Whether it's an ancient slave society, a feudal society, or our modern capitalist system, in each and every one of these human societies, politics and economics are defined by that relationship that they share with one another. They are never metaphysically distinct from each other. This is a huge distinction between the historical materialist understanding of human society and history and mainstream conceptions of politics and economics as separate institutions, separate fields of study. This is, the sort of thing that capitalist media and universities and intellectuals promote. And this leads to a lot of confusion when people who aren't familiar with dialectical materialism and historical materialism try to look at these philosophies for the first time. I know I was scratching my head a lot the first time I started trying to read Marx's work on political economy. But to recap, the political economy of human society is constantly changing. These changes are driven primarily by advancements to the economic base as technology and our ability to make stuff improves over time. And changes in the base lead to changes in the superstructure, and over time, this leads to transitions from one stage of development to the next. For thousands of years, human beings have been living in political economies that constitute what we call class society. In a class society, humans are divided up into different economic classes, each of which has a different relationship with the means of production. And currently, we live in the capitalist era of class society, and under capitalism, there are two primary classes: the bourgeoisie, or capitalist class, which owns the means of production, and the proletariat, or working class, which operates the means of production. The most important social institution in the superstructure of a class society is what we call the state. A state is a form of government which a ruling class develops and maintains to enforce its power and agenda over society. The state's primary method of maintaining power for the ruling class is violence. As Friedrich Engels wrote, "As the state arose from the need to keep class antagonisms in check, but also arose in the thick of the fight between the classes, it is normally the state of the most powerful economically ruling class, which by its means becomes also the politically ruling class, and so acquires new means of holding down and exploiting the oppressed class. The ancient state was, above all, the state of the slave owners for holding down the slaves, just as the feudal state was the organ of the nobility for holding down the peasant, serfs, and bondsmen, and the modern representative state is the instrument for exploiting wage labor by capital." The fundamental goal of communism is to abolish class society and the state and state violence once and for all. How we intend to do that is well beyond the scope of this video, so for now, let's just stay focused on the state itself and its role in capitalist political economy. Under capitalism, political struggles take place primarily through political parties. A political party is simply a social organization which represents a particular economic class and the struggle over control and benefit from the means of production and the economic base of society. In the USA, there are only two political parties with any meaningful power over the state: the Republicans and the Democrats. There are various laws and systems built into our state system as it's currently designed and as it exists, which prevent third parties from having any real meaningful power in the current system. But the most important limitation to third parties or non-bourgeois parties is funding. The Republicans and the Democrats receive massive funding from capitalists, funding that no anti-capitalist party could ever receive in this capitalist political economy. Because capitalists dominate both the Republicans and the Democrats, we refer to them as bourgeois parties, meaning that they exist to further the interests of the bourgeoisie, of the capitalists. These parties have very different strategies for how to keep capitalists in power, which does lead to legitimate struggle between Republicans and Democrats, as we see. But what's important to understand is that both the Republicans and the Democrats each represent the interests of a corresponding sect of capitalists. And neither of these parties represent the interests of the working class in a real, meaningful manner. In other words, you can view this struggle for power between Republicans and Democrats as mere infighting that takes place between different factions of the same ruling capitalist class. In practical terms, we, the working class, have no real power within either of these two parties at all. Great pains are taken to give us, as workers, the illusion of choice and representation, but at the end of the day, we are only given the choice to vote for one of the candidates that the capitalists who really control the party have decided to endorse. And don't get me wrong, which party wins does have impact on society, since both parties have different strategies and styles for keeping workers oppressed, different ethos about that. But no matter which party wins, the workers ultimately lose, and the state will only ever serve the interests of the capitalist class. Capitalists control these parties in various ways, but the most important tool which capitalists use to maintain control over both bourgeois parties in the USA is wealth. One of the defining characteristics of capitalism is that capitalists accumulate a huge amount of wealth through the exploitation of the working class. This means that the most wealthy people in the world are capitalists, and capitalists use this wealth to maintain control of the bourgeois parties that govern capitalist society. It's been proven in various studies that the wealthy in the USA have far more power in setting the agenda of both the Republican and Democrat parties, and that poor workers have almost no impact at all on the policies set by our bourgeois democracy. This also bears out in the economic patterns of society, as capitalists continue to become wealthy even through crises like war, natural disaster, and pandemics, while the conditions of the working class have been growing increasingly desperate and precarious. And now we're starting to come to understand the nature of oligarchy under capitalism. Oligarchy, rule by the few over the many, is of course not exclusive to capitalism. Oligarchy has existed for thousands of years. In fact, I would make the argument that oligarchy is really just another word for class society. Oligarchy has not existed perpetually in every society. There have been many societies that are more egalitarian and where the means of production were owned collectively, that lacked an economic ruling class. But over the last 200 years, capitalism has wiped out most of these indigenous societies or imposed colonial or imperialist power over those societies. In previous stages of development of human society, oligarchy took different forms. For instance, under feudalism, the ruling class, the oligarchs, were kings, queens, nobles, mandarins, high-ranking church clergy, and so on. The source of power for those oligarchs was the ownership of land and the exploitation of serfs who worked that land. And to understand why, you have to understand the economic base of feudal society. During the feudal era, human beings were in an agrarian society. They had an agrarian economy, so land was the primary means of production. This is key to understand if we want to wrap our heads around oligarchy in our modern era. The primary means of production, the means of production that produce the things we need to survive, are mechanized factories, massive computer networks and systems, industrialized farms, that sort of thing. Very, very expensive stuff. And the relations of production which exist under capitalism allow only a small number of individual capitalists to purchase and privately own those means of production with vast amounts of capital. Under feudalism, the oligarchs owned farmland and peasants were forced to work that land. Under capitalism, the oligarchs own capital, and workers must operate the means of production that capitalists buy with that capital in exchange for wages if we hope to survive. Understanding all of this, hopefully you can now understand why we say that the current oligarchy of human society is the capitalist class. The oligarchy, or ruling class, is defined by human relationships and productive forces. Specifically, that means that in any given class society, the oligarchs are the people who own and control the means of production, and whoever controls the state, since that allows them to maintain and develop their power through violence. The goal of communism is to end oligarchy once and for all, to end class society once and for all. See, capitalism only has two essential classes: the capitalist class, which is a very, very small number of people, and the working class, which is almost everybody. When workers seize the means of production, that means that the overwhelming majority of humanity will collectively own the means of production. There will be no more ruling class. Eventually, the capitalist class will lose its power over society. There will no longer be a need for the state or state violence. But building this stateless, classless society is a huge project. It's going to take a very long time. It's a hell of a lot of work. But that is the dream of communism, even if it takes many more generations. And that brings us back to what I said in our last video about oligarchy. Let's take a look again at what I said. The oligarchs of the modern era are capitalists. Capitalists are oligarchs. They're the same friggin' thing, and they always have been. So trying to claim that the USA is slipping into oligarchy all of a sudden is just an obfuscation of the fact that our capitalist system has always been oligarchical since its founding. Now, when you see that clip, hopefully it makes more sense why I am concerned about the way a lot of liberal intellectuals have been promoting the idea that oligarchy is new in the USA. The USA and other bourgeois democracies have been ruled by the few since the very beginning. Certainly, things are getting worse these days. The oligarchs are developing their power over us, and we are seeing more overtly authoritarian power grabs from the tech bro sect of the ruling class. But oligarchy in and of itself is not new to the USA. We have always had a capitalist political economy, so we have always had oligarchy. Here at NonCompete, we think it's important to guard against the notion that the USA and other bourgeois democracies have ever been anything but oligarchies. The reason for this is simple. We don't want workers to be conditioned to think that what we had before Donald Trump took office was a good, functional system that served the working class. Capitalist oligarchs in the USA have done significant harm to workers domestically and abroad for centuries, and it's not a system that we should want to go back to. Instead, we should be trying to build towards communism, ending oligarchy and class society once and for all in all of human society. The only way to accomplish this is by developing class consciousness in workers and trying to build parties and organizations that represent our class interests, and teaching workers that we have had oligarchy since the beginning of the USA and other bourgeois democracies. We're going to talk about this a lot more in future videos, but for now, we really just want you to understand the nature of the oligarchy that you live under today and the fact that it's rooted in this capitalist political economy. Now, truth be told, this video is really just scratching the surface of dialectical materialist and historical materialist philosophy. There's a whole lot more that you need to learn to really wrap your head around all this. And if you want to learn more, I'll again direct you to our free ebook on the dialectical materialist philosophy curriculum. And if you want to be informed when our historical materialism book comes out, please join our free Patreon tier over at patreon.com/noncompete, where we also offer bonus videos and updates from time to time. Here at NonCompete, we aim to send our audience with class-conscious content that hits different. If you think this video understood the assignment, be sure to subscribe. And if you really think we ate and left no crumbs, maybe consider donating on Patreon or Comradery. I'm EJ. This is NonCompete. Thanks so much for watching. Skibbity. See you next time. I hate myself.